So it's connecting.
Fantastic. Okay, so again, thank you so much everyone for joining us today for our first NGO Researchers Forum for 2022. It's very exciting. I do just want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are all living and working today. I'm on Wangal country at the moment, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also pay my respects to any First Nations people who might be online with us today. Please feel free to pop in the chat which country you're dialing in from today as well. So I'll just give you a bit of an introduction or a background as to sort of how we've got here today. So the NGO Research Forum, as it was known then, sort of informally started in 2008 by Mission Australia and the Benevolent Society. It's taken sort of different shapes and forms over the years, but eventually evolved into a partnership between NCOS and the University of Sydney as co-conveners from 2018 onwards. And the primary aim of the NGO Researchers Forum has really sort of remained unchanged over the years. It's really been a forum for NGO researchers to present and discuss their work and really strengthen and share evidence-informed approaches within the sector. So the relaunch in March this year, which took place through a co-design workshop, allowed us to really explore what a reinvigorated forum means, what it could look like, and discuss the top issues that were really important to us as NGO researchers. And so we collectively agreed to discuss grey research and to look at best practice examples and really to aim for capability building. So in terms of what we're doing today, so the March planning session identified co-design as a really important topic and one that's, you know, interesting to a lot of people. So we issued a call out for NGO presentations and got a really amazing sort of overwhelming response actually. So much so that the co-design topic will carry over to the next forum on the 23rd of June as a sort of part 2 to this session. And so today we'll be hearing from 3 really excellent projects that will be sharing with us their best tips when undertaking genuine co-design, and whether that's for a research project, a program of activities, or for a service. So for smooth discussions today, we'd like to request our presenters and all our participants to be mindful of the time that we have allocated today. So we have about 15 minutes for each speaker to present their learnings, followed immediately by 10 minutes for the whole group to discuss, you know, your key takeaways and ask any questions that you might have. We do ask that you try and hold off your questions, if possible, to the end of the presentation for that sort of 10-minute discussion session. But of course, feel free to type in any comments and questions that you might have in the chat box as we go. So I think we should just get started with our presentations. Rosalita, do we have Carla on the line with us?
We do, Elise.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So I just introduced the first presenter. So we have Carla Ware, who's the Group Manager of Operations at ABSEC. Thank you so much, Carla. Carla will be talking about the Aboriginal-led co-design of the Aboriginal Guardianship support model for better outcomes. Over to you, Carla.
Thank you, Elise. I can share my screen, can't I? Hang on, here we go, share screen.
Yes, you can. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Okay, yes. Thank you.
That's all right.
All right. Hang on. Can everyone see my screen?
Not yet.
Hang on. Share screen. Yeah. Here we go. Is that, yeah?
Fabulous. Looking good.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I'd like to acknowledge the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices and connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also wish to acknowledge and pay my respects to members of the stolen generation, particularly those who have not had the opportunity to make it home. and to those Aboriginal children in care today, for they are future elders and knowledge keepers. Hang on.
Sorry to interrupt, Carla. It's just on the sort of the working version of the presentation. So you might just need to go to this sort of the presentation version, I suppose, for the slideshow to start.
Hang on. How do I do that? Hang on. Here we go. No, display settings maybe. Is that it?
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right. So thank you for joining the session today on ABSEC's Aboriginal-led community co-design. I'm Carla Ware, as Elise mentioned. I'm the Group Manager Operations for ABSEC. I'm a Moalga woman from St. Paul Village, Moa Island. I was at the New South Wales Ombudsman's Office for 16 years prior to this role as the manager, and then recently I was the acting Deputy Ombudsman. But they made the move across to ABSEC in recognition of the fact that 46% of children in out-of-home care are Aboriginal, and approximately 3 Aboriginal children are removed every day. So I wanted to be a part of the change and hopefully to address this really significant issue for my community. So as you're probably all aware, ABSEC is the peak body for Aboriginal children, families and community in New South Wales. We're an Aboriginal owned and controlled organisation, and we have a strong membership base of sector organisations and people both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal. ABSEC's main focus of work is around Aboriginal children, young people, families and communities impacted by the child protection and out-of-home care system. We support the growth. Sorry, is someone? No? Okay, we support the growth of a quality Aboriginal community controlled sector in New South Wales to deliver much needed supports to our communities across the state. Hang on, can I just go like this? Yeah, okay, perfect. So our yarn today is about Aboriginal communities designing, developing and delivering solutions that are relevant to their community's needs. I'll cover a brief background to the community co-design of the Aboriginal Guardianship support model and our framework of approach, our co-design method and activities, including using the double D outcome design method, some of our insights and learnings on Aboriginal-led co-design that I'll weave in throughout the story, and then we'll have some time, as Elise said, at the end for any questions. So first up, I'll give you some background info on this project, and I'll start by sharing our first insight, which is a key point of differentiation about co-design. So we're using community co-design throughout each stage of our project. So from the service planning design to the implementation and delivery of an initiative through to evaluation, because this approach obviously supports self-determination of Aboriginal people. We've developed an outcomes-focused framework, as shown in the diagram, to progress this, a framework which was designed and owned by Aboriginal people and has also been co-designed with our key stakeholders. So as you can see in the diagram, Aboriginal children and families are at the core of each aspect of the design model. We start the design process with them at the centre. They are part of the co-design through each stage of the development from the start to finish to ensure their wants, aspirations, advice and ideas are embedded into the model. Co-design and cultural safety encircles them throughout the model. We do not see them as service recipients or clients, but as co-designers, decision makers and service users of an initiative they help create to achieve their desired goal. So our next insight is that ongoing co-design and feedback loops are essential to ensure that the design solution actually delivers the desired outcomes. And if it isn't, then improvements can be included along the way to make it work best. We learned that iterations are often necessary to ensure activities remain tailored so they achieve the stated outcomes, even if it feels we're taking one step forward and then 2 steps back, or doing a loop-to-loop along the way. Our approach supports iterations, but it does not take effort and but it does take effort and continuous review. Plus, it needs the right mechanisms built into the project to enable change along the way. Another insight about doing things differently is that often service design sits within government system under a top-down driven policy approach. And we've seen co-design used as a one-off or point-in-time process, which is not ideal for our communities. And as you would all know, that it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked, which is evident from the statistics that I mentioned earlier. To us, co-design is more about people having their say at a point in time. So we like people to have a say along every single aspect of the journey. We don't want to wait until the end of a project to see if it worked or not. We want to see if it's working along the way, and we want the opportunity to make change as necessary. We want the opportunity to capture learnings and use this co-design framework to improve elements that are not contributing to achieving the desired outcomes. We've been using this continuous co-design approach in the creation and implementation of our new guardianship support service, and we will soon be incorporating developmental co-design evaluation methods as well. The backstory to the co-design and creation of the Aboriginal guardianship support model is alarming. So as I said earlier, Aboriginal children are significantly overrepresented in the out-of-home care system. And this situation persists despite multiple system reviews and reforms to the care sector. The current system of services and supports continues to fail to achieve better outcomes for Aboriginal children and families. We set out to find a solution to supporting kids who were shifted to guardianship orders from 2014-15 and were not thriving in the current system. This journey started with community raising the alarm over the government's change of policy and legislation around permanency arrangements for Aboriginal children and young people in out-of-home care. And as we found, and the data confirmed, the shift to guardianship actually had a detrimental impact for many of the 760 Aboriginal children and young people transitioned to guardianship. We saw many come back under child protection services and others become disconnected from their culture, kin, and country. These Aboriginal children were not thriving as intended under the change in policy. In response, a support model was co-designed from the ground up and involved people who had a stake in making this project a success. Our Aboriginal-led community co-design started with ABSEC having one-on-one conversations with guardians of Aboriginal children and young people and their families about their experiences of guardianship, life as a guardian, and life being on guardianship. So we spoke to the children as well. We learned to investigate issues that communities are concerned about, define the issues from the community members' perspectives and their lived experiences, which were very different in perspective to what the department was saying or had envisioned. Design local solutions within local communities. As we are working with different communities in our projects, trial sites, so we have Dharawal, Gundungurra, Darug people in the south. We have Wanneroo, Awabakal, Warramai and Darkinjung people in the north. So we have to be very mindful that we're dealing with very different communities and what they want to see will be different from one place to the next. In summary, our co-design has been a successful approach because it's Aboriginal-led. It's designed from the ground up. It involves everyone who has a stake in making it a success, and it involves Aboriginal families from the start, and they are at the core of the design process. So to look at it from a system perspective, as you can see, the current service system model looks at addressing problems and designing services based on data, stats, and other evidence collected about people within a defined policy context to drive a top-down approach. ABSEC and our partners are envisaging a new system, so we're trying to flip the current model upside down. In the current system, government policy often drives government policy drives the system. It's needs-based and has been slow to react to the circumstances of Aboriginal children and families. It's not particularly adaptive, and children and families are clients at the end receiving a service rather than them formulating what is needed for them. Government departments often work in silos, so planning is often done individually, not holistically, and reporting processes are largely based on outputs and not meaningful outcomes for our families. Under the ABSEC framework and approach for better outcomes, Aboriginal children and families are at the heart of the model and are in the best position to drive changes in their own lives. Our way of planning and service delivery flips the current practice upside down and starts with the end service users to determine what their aspirations and desired outcomes are, and they have a part in looking at solutions for them. So moving into our approach, our co-designers were varied and had different roles at different times. We could also call them co-collaborators. So we had our ABSEC membership, board and community members who raised community concerns, issues and advice about their experiences of guardianship, leading to the creation of position papers and submissions to government. We had collaborative working partnership groups with key government agencies to inform the new Aboriginal commissioning framework for targeted investment of Aboriginal-led initiatives. We had the funding body who had an integral role to play in the process, plus their shared knowledge of experiences and data during the service design service mapping. And they provided expertise regarding the provider market. And they were also a collaborative project partner. We had cross-agency governance groups chaired by ABSEC, which are collaborative forums with members who have invested interests in making the solution a success. And then we had end service users, so community members, Aboriginal sector service practitioners, working together to provide their insights, ideas, knowledge, and advice to create this targeted initiative that directly addresses community concerns. Our next insight is that under our method, we have changed the dynamics of the decision-making processes and approach to service co-design. At the end of the project, we'll review our learnings, evaluation, and findings all together for future rollout and application. So our next insight is that the co-design was ABSEC-led and facilitated by our senior Aboriginal staff. So we were able to provide a safe, supportive space for people to freely share their concerns, ideas, and advice and raise matters without fear of retribution. This working space and approach were inherently culturally appropriate and supportive. We learned that not all discussion, information sharing, advice, ideas, and feedback occurs in planned group settings. So we used multiple ways for people to share their views and insights with us and looped those back to other co-designers. A tip, we were privileged to have expert designers from the New South Wales Treasury's Human-Centred Design team to work with us on key elements of service planning. These were valuable partners on structuring the design planning sessions before, during, and after each workshop. And they also learned a lot about working with Aboriginal people by working alongside ABSEC on this project. Here is a snapshot of our co-design journey. It's quite in-depth, and I'm happy to share these slides after the presentation. And as you can see, our co-design partners were engaged at various levels of activities as we've travelled along the path to create a new service model. The next insight I'd like to share with you is that in late 2021, we had end service user co-designers as part of our assessment and selection panel for the Aboriginal service providers. So they actually sat on the panel and helped decide who was going to be picked for this. And they provided us and them the opportunity to share their experiences and their insights into what they thought would work. There was a great acknowledgement of the community members' expertise and advice on the panel. If you'd like to hear more about our journey from some of our project partners and co-designers from their perspective, I actually have a video that I can share with you, and I'm happy to pop it in the chat after we finish. Yeah, so I'm getting some nods. So as I mentioned earlier, we use the human-centered design model, which is an outcome-focused approach, and it's referred to as the double D method. Discover, define, develop, and deliver model of service planning. So we held community co-design activities and workshops on each of the aspects of the double D method to develop and create a solution. We travelled from A, don't know, to B, we do know. This approach is widely acknowledged and implemented across government in service planning and development. However, and this is our next insight, this approach missed some key considerations for us, particularly around respectfulness of going onto country, being welcomed onto country by local elders, and working on country with different Aboriginal communities to find a solution to a community issue they were deeply concerned about. So this is more than just about having an acknowledgement of country at the beginning of co-design workshop or a welcome to country by a local elder. ABSEC wanted to apply an Aboriginal lens over the DD design approach before we began any workshop program to ensure it was implemented in the right way. Otherwise, we'd be using an approach created at the turn of the century by the British Design Council to find a solution to a New South Wales Aboriginal community concern in 2022. It's important to note that we learnt that an off-the-shelf design method imported from overseas should not be implemented without being tailored and customised for the co-designer group and end service users you're working with. Regardless of how well credentialed and validated an approach might be, it needs customising. The language used and the customs around engagement all needed to be checked and validated with the Aboriginal communities we were working with. And if not, it could have led to, it could have led to disaster pretty much, and not to the outcomes that the communities themselves desired. However, what was important about this method is that it leads with discovering insights from people's lived experience and uses it as primary evidence about community issues. This is the first step and not the last, which is a significant point. People's stories can't be told via statistics and data collected about them. Plus, it values human stories, ideas, advice, and insights, and it values scribing and documenting people's advice in their voice as a true source of what might be done, how, when, where, and how much. The theme of designing the right things and designing things right was a useful method in co-designing human service solutions.
2 minutes, Carla.
Yep, I'll speed through it. The next 3 slides are some samples of feedback, summaries, and presented back to co-designers after each of the workshop sessions to show you the progression of following a DD human-centered design method. So anyway, I don't have enough time, but we'll provide the slides and everyone can have a look at the feedback that we received.
What an excellent initiative. I would just, I'm envying your tools in particular. I can imagine the kind of design that went into it in the first instance.
Yeah, okay, yeah, absolutely. I don't know, okay, so I'm just going to try and, so we've got there, okay. So here are some ideas about the family support services. The Guardian said might create a positive, meaningful change to their kids' lives. And co-designers were asked to have a think about these, suggest changes, add more, cross out ones that were not important, and discussions were then held on which were important and the how, when, who, where, and why. And co-designers were asked the question, if you had these supports or services, what would these lead to for your kids and family? So here we go. The co-design continued to drill down on what the service looks like, who would go to for support and why, and what they would want to see and have happen there, and how we could bring it to life for them. And then, finally, here's the co-design model. The components of this model, as you can see, were well detailed and prescribed, and are currently being delivered by ACOs through community hubs and their one-stop shops. And there are 2 sites. One is at Minto and one is at Minderibba Lauk in Metford. How many minutes do I have?
I think we're at time, Carla.
Okay. All right, that's it. Thank you, guys. Do we have any questions?
Thank you so much, Carla. And I'm so sorry to have to rush you through what is such an incredible project and support model and example of co-design. What an incredible piece of work. Really hats off to you. And I think ABSEC has led the way, I think, for a long time on, what it means to do genuine co-design and kind of, have lead from the ground up.
Yes.
Are there any questions from anyone on the line today? Any comments or feedback or questions about the presentation or the project that Carla has taken us through? Anything from anyone? I mean, I have a question. I always ask this question because it's important for me when I think about trying to do co-design work going forward. Like, what were some of the biggest challenges that you actually came up against during that whole process?
I think it was, well, I've only been in the role for 4 weeks, but from what I've discussed with the team, and I mean, I'm happy to take that back and get some more in-depth feedback for you, Elise, but from what they've said was just trying to, it was trying to, make this a different model. So people had to be brought along on the journey, and it was really hand-holding for them, particularly in terms of the department and how it worked, because this is something that's never been done, particularly within DCJ. And so it was really about making sure everyone was on the same page along the journey, and everybody was comfortable with the progress going forward. And just also ensuring that, the voices of the people, the guardians themselves, the children and the Aboriginal families was at the centre of all thought and decision processing along the way. So they were probably the most challenges.
Yeah, because that was going to be.
Yeah, there might have been some specific ones that I'm not aware of, and I'm happy to ask Gillian and get back to you about that.
That would be great, thank you. And because that was going to be my other question was, what has the response from DCJ been like? How have they? How have you brought them along on that journey?
From what I can tell, I mean, Gillian, she's the project manager, and she would have been presenting today, but she's on some much needed leave. From what I can tell, she's a great collaborator, and I guess, because it just definitely wasn't working. The outcomes for Aboriginal guardians and their families, you can see it's just not there. So there was no room for DCJ to move on this issue. And it was really, I guess, her expertise and her collaborative approach that just brought them along on the journey and showed them, the benefit of doing business this way. And we know there's been so many reports put out there. And as I mentioned, I was at the Ombudsman's office. I've written reports 12 years ago about how services designed centrally and imposed on communities do not work for Aboriginal communities. And so we know this, body of work exists. We know this is fact. We know this is evidence. And so I guess now they are, open to being led on a new way of doing business. And so we didn't, from what I have heard, we didn't come up against, many roadblocks, and they're happy to come on a kind of journey with us.
Yeah, that's very encouraging to hear. We do have a question in the chat box from Anthony Brown. A comment also, what an amazing project and fantastic project. What was the feedback from children and families about the process?
From what I hear, it was very different because they're not used to that. So as I mentioned in the presentation, the way that things have been done previously is that Aboriginal communities and children and guardians are consulted at a point in time. So to be consulted in every single aspect of the work and actually be given the opportunity to sit on the panels and choose the providers, it was a really self-determining and empowering process for them to be involved in. And today we're still in contact, well, Gillian's still in contact with a raft of guardians who were taken through the process. And so we continue that even today.
Thank you, Carla. I think we've still got about 5 minutes left before our next presentation. Are there any other questions or comments from anyone online, either through the chat or if you want to unmute yourself? I guess,
I do
sorry,
have a
was that?
question, Elise.
Yep,
Sorry,
go ahead,
Rosalita,
Rosalita.
and I hope it's mirroring what other people are thinking right now. For non-Aboriginal controlled organizations, how do we adopt some of the practice of going from the ground up, especially mindful that you know, when we offer services to Aboriginal communities, it's very relational and not transactional. And what can we adopt from your model?
Well, as I said, I'll share the slides with you. I think it's just having your Aboriginal service users at the centre of any work that you intend to do with them. So instead of them being passive recipients, them being meaningful contributors. Because as we've seen in past service delivery methods, anything created, you know, centrally and then rolled out doesn't work. So I guess for non-Aboriginal NGOs, it's really to find your key stakeholders and your key Aboriginal service users who you want to be involved in the process. And then rather than, you know, the key point is rather than having a one point in time consultation, is really taking them along on the journey and them being co-contributors and really it's a partnership. It's not even, it's more than co-design, it's a partnership. And then, you know, also we're here. If you need advice, you know me now, you've got my details. Jilly and I would be happy to step you through this process, and we'd be happy to support any NGOs who want to implement this model of co-design, because we want to see this rolled out across the state. We want to see it rolled out across the sector. We want to see or anyone servicing Aboriginal communities to do it in this way. So we're happy to support NGOs who are interested in this model.
Thanks so much for that, Carla. That's such a generous offer, and I think certainly something that I'm sure many of us will take you up on. And I think you know, that's one of the sort of objectives of this NGO Researchers Forum, was that we would be able to make these sorts of connections and learn from our peers' work and you know, share learnings and key insights. So that's been really helpful. So I think we're pretty much ready to move on to our next presentation. So thank you so much, Carla, for your presentation. It's been very insightful. We've learned a lot. So our next presentation will be given by Joanne Cummings, who is the Senior Research and Evaluation Officer at Redkite. And Joanne will be talking about Redkite's Lived Experience Advisory Group. So over to you, Joanne. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. Rosalita, should I share my screen? Okay. And hopefully this works.
Hey, great. Yeah, many of you.
Okay, can everyone see that without the notes now?
That's great, Jo. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so I'm coming to you today from Darwell country, and I'm presenting about our lived experience advisory group that we set out at Redkite. And unlike Carla's presentation, it is very basic, and not the consumers weren't as involved. So it was the very beginnings of just learning how to set up a lived advisory group and the kind of steps we took to do that. So just a bit about Redkite. So we're a not-for-profit organisation that supports children aged 0 to 18 with cancer and their families. And we provide a range of support, as you can see from the slide there. So we have like practical support, financial support, emotional mental health support, and palliative support as well, and bereavement support. So it's through the whole cancer journey, Redkite is there. And we're a national organisation. So we've been around for about 40 years now as well, so it's pretty historical. So why did Redkite want to set up a lived experience advisory group? Well, we wanted to have a committee of people with lived experience of childhood cancer to help us develop our client outcomes framework. Because as you know, in the sector at the moment, it's not just enough to report on the outputs of our programs and services. We also need to let people know what the outcomes are of our services. So in the end, the group was around 8 Redkite clients, and that was, I think it was like 4 mums whose child had or has cancer, and 4 young people who were living with cancer. And they were from 4 different states across Australia. So we're trying to get that spread across the whole of Australia because we are a national organisation. And why did we want to have this group? It was, there's this shift in social service to working with consumers, and Redkite have always consulted consumers in the past, but we haven't worked with them and we haven't heard their voices strongly, and we really wanted to push that at Redkite. And so much so that we now have a strategic area of focus, which is all about co-design and how to get consumers more involved in what we're doing. And also at the end of the day, the products and services that Redkite are delivering are for our clients. So, they know a lot, they've seen what we've done in our financial assistance program, for example, and they have, they can give us a lot of feedback, tell us about it and what they would do differently. And it was very much basic, so unlike Carla's presentation at all, and it very much a test and learn. So we're kind of just learning as we went along. And then to make life even more difficult, we started in 2020, so right before COVID. So there were grand plans, and the plans were to have like a face-to-face group, fly in participants from other states, have external expertise come in to help us consult, and because I'm no expert at co-design and I'm just a researcher, so I'm very much learning how to do it as we go along. And so that was all there. But then with COVID hitting, we had to shift. And so we moved to a online model, which was just Zoom meetings. The budget got cut because obviously being a charity, you've got to be really mindful of that at a time where money was going to be tight. And yeah, so it was lots of challenges. Okay, so like I said, I'm just going to talk through like the basics of kind of like setting up a league and how we went about it. And, this is just our experience of what we did, and it's very practical, but like what other people do is differently. And I guess it depends on the different types of consumers and people and families that you're working with. But we found a good approach was to develop a consumer engagement framework, and that was for everything at Redkite. So it's how we want to engage consumers in the different activities and things and different programs at Redkite. And we see it as kind of like a spectrum where, on the one end, consumers are less involved and have less influence over a project. Whereas on the other hand, like Carla's project that she just presented, it's very much consumer-led and they have heaps of influence and are involved at all stages of a project. Ours is very beginning, so we're sort of in the middle. We did more than inform people. We did consult. We did involve them through this league process, and we collaborated. So very basic. We want to do more of that and build on that, but yeah, this is just like I said, just the beginning. Okay, so setting up the league for us. Okay, this is just like some of the steps and some of the things that we thought were important in setting up a league for the first time. Was that we developed a terms of reference document. So we had a contract with who was going to be in the league, and it clearly outlined, what the purpose of the league was, its scope. It would only go for a maximum of 12 months, and it was really focused around one project, which was designing an outcomes framework. Who the members of the league would be, the level of commitment that was required from clients, and that was like 5 meetings over the course of up to 12 months and that kind of thing. It was that the group would be voluntary and that there would be no payment made. So that obviously is not best practice. Whenever consumers are involved in this type of work, they should be paid, but the decision was made not to pay them and it was completely voluntary. And we also outlined in our terms of reference how we would make decisions within the group, because obviously everyone comes from different backgrounds, they have different opinions. So we used a consensus model with decision making. Okay, we also did, obviously we had a consent form, being good research and evaluation people. So we recorded the videos, made sure we had consent to use them and consent to use any quotes and images that came out. Another interesting thing was that we had a wellbeing plan. Obviously, if you have a child that has cancer, it's pretty stressful. It can be traumatic. People, don't necessarily want to relive the experience if they're past the journey, or they might currently be on the journey and experiencing different emotions. So we made sure that we had in place a self-care plan, which was, and we take a strengths-based approach at Redkite, which means that as the consumer, like, you have the role, like you have it within yourself to help yourself. Like if you're stressed, what can you do? What strategies do you have that you can rely on to help you not feel stressed? What are your triggers? That kind of thing. And that was all put together in a bit of a questionnaire, which was shared with our client involvement coordinator, just so that, we knew that, like, if a conversation was going in a particular way, that might stress that person out, and made sure that we were checking in with people as we were going. Okay, and then we had the other major thing was the recruitment criteria and the expression of interest email. So before you send out your expression of interest, you really want to know who are the consumers that you want in your lived experience group. And that recruitment criteria is absolutely crucial. And you kind of need to think of, what's the vision of the ideal group that I want, and how can I attract these people? Now, we did only send out an email, but there are other methods, but we were restricted. So the group, like, what you're looking for is demographics of the group with a diversity of experience of childhood cancer. And the way we tried to get this was, so we had a list of, the different demographic characteristics we wanted people to kind of have in the group. And when people clicked on the button to register their interest in the experience through the EOI email, they got sent to a little Google sheet, which they could fill in all their contact details like normal, but there was a bit of a demographic questionnaire which asked them if they were a parent, a young person, the age at which the child was diagnosed, the cancer type, because we want a variety of those, where they lived geographically, their CALD background, so culturally and linguistically diverse people, their Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander background, if they had a disability or the child had a disability, and their LGBTQ plus status as well. So we use that information to get together our short list of who would potentially be good in the group as well. And unfortunately, we did not get all of those characteristics in the group. It would have been ideal, but that was the plan, and that was where we were going with that. And in the end, and then after we did the EOI, we did like one-on-one interviews with shortlisted clients, and they were with our client involvement officer. And we did this as part of a risk mitigation strategy. So, we didn't want anyone that was recently bereaved. And also we wanted to make sure that people had, like, that their opinions were not too strong or not too outrageous, because there are certain things like that Redkite don't support. It could be around alternative therapies and things like that, and we really didn't want that within the group. We still wanted it to reflect Redkite values and what Redkite stand for. Okay. Yeah, and then we did get more people than we needed from our expression of interest, and those people were redirected to our Kite Connector community, which is another way that Redkite engaged consumers. So this is just a little map of what we did. So very basic, nothing like Carla's extreme map. And I saw that, I was like, oh my goodness, thank God we're not going down that track at the moment. And so engaged with people, because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of learning. So we did 5 meetings over the course of about 8 months, and they were at this time, so we were doing the outcomes framework, but we also needed to understand what the needs of families who have a child with cancer are and what the children themselves needs are. So we had a needs assessment survey, which was happening at the same time. So the League was used to, help us to create questions and do the survey design and all those kind of aspects, and cognitively test the surveys. And they also helped us make sense of the survey. And in a way, it was a way for clients to validate their experiences that they had of childhood cancer and come together through that consensus model to help us create our client outcomes framework, looking at the greatest kind of needs that people had. So the output from that, the output for the outcomes framework was this. And I'm not going to go into detail, but it's just this is all the words, everything that we used was very much co-designed and very much created with the group. So we have our 4 domains of empowerment, financial resilience and well-being, emotional and mental well-being, and connection. So they were the 4 things that people really felt strongly about, came out in our needs survey. It also came out very strongly through the lived experience of the group. And then there were sub-themes as well. So that was the output for the outcomes. And then, so what did we learn in doing all of this? So some of the key things we learned were, this is the very first time, very small thing. So, the idea is, start small and try to do it well as much as you can. We learned that we need to recruit from a range of sources. So we already had our Kite connectors, so that was already an engaged community of consumers. We had Lift, which is our newsletter. And we also asked our social workers, are there any clients that you work with in particular who you think would be interested in something like this, and reaching out to them that way. We looked and asked for diverse voices, and we thought really carefully and realistically about our recruitment criteria, like I was saying before. And, at the end of the day, we didn't get a dad, but that's okay. We had a young man. So we did have at least one male voice in the group of 8. And rapport is critical, and you really need to make time when you're setting up a group like this to develop rapport with the group, get to know each other, and for the group, and to share that dynamics and make time for that. There's also discrete roles that we had within our league. So we had 2 facilitators. So one facilitator looked out for the project and was the research evaluation type side, and the other was our client involvement coordinator, where she was more looking out for the well-being of people during the league, and if people were upset or if there were any issues, she would follow up afterwards. We also have you've got to have a flexible view on engaging clients. And when you have a session, you might have a bit of an agenda about these are the kind of things we want to talk about, but often that will veer off course, and you just need to go with it and see how it comes. And sometimes it can lead to new ideas and new things that you didn't know about, and try to have different approaches. So we were limited to just a Zoom approach. In person would have been great, but that wasn't possible during COVID. And sorry, was someone there? Okay, and then having clear timeframes and parameters in place, because sometimes people lose interest. And I think towards the end of the groups, by the time we're up to meeting 5, a couple of people had dropped off, but I do think that is because people weren't paid to engage in that. And so when it's voluntary, sometimes you feel like you can step away. And also having a child with cancer means that, things come up and your priorities will shift.
A minute call, Joe. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no worries. That was it anyway. So then that was just we did an evaluation at the end and just had some feedback. Cool. All right, I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Joe. Take a breath. You've crammed a lot into that 15 minutes and, very much kept to time. Thank you so much for that. Are there any questions or comments from anyone online?
Thanks so much for that, Joe. I was thinking, what are your plans for the group in the future?
So what happened was we planned to run another one in 2021, and that even got to the point of expressions of interest. But then we ended up, I think the project that was meant to be on, it kind of shifted within the organisation. And so that didn't come about. And they're kind of there, like we're kind of keeping them warm, if that makes sense. And like saying that when we do it, it's going to happen. And then we've had some changes recently with staff in our research team. So we just haven't had the resources to be able to do it, but it is something that we want to do again.
And Kate, I'm Joe's colleague. Hi everyone, I'm Nicole, calling in from Melbourne on Wurundjeri country. The other thing that we're looking at doing in the future too is in alignment with our strategic direction. We really want to engage with working with children. That's an area that we've never really dipped our toe in. We've always mainly collaborated and done work with parents and young adults who've had cancer as a child, but we haven't really had any work in the space of actually doing co-design with children. So that's something that we're keen to explore maybe next year.
And there is a question in the chat. I know, Joe, that you said that the league was unpaid and on a voluntary basis at that point in time. So you may or may not know the answer to this, or others on the call may have some insights into this as well. But the question in the chat is, in terms of payment for consumers and clients for consultation, what is best practice? For example, cash, vouchers, and recommended rates.
Yeah, Nicole, did you want to jump in with what we had planned to do?
Yeah, so what we had planned to do was some sort of financial reimbursement. We were intending to fly everyone in, so everyone's accommodation and transfers and meals would have been covered as well. I don't know the answer to what the most appropriate thing is. I have worked at organisations where vouchers have been used, cash. The rate is again up to each, I think, organisation. I think around 50 to 100 is kind of standard-ish, but I've heard of others being paid a bit more than that. I guess it really depends on the organisation, but I think we were initially going with a cash reimbursement.
And Anthony, was there something you wanted to add to that? I saw you raised your hand.
Yeah, just thanks everybody. I'm Anthony Brown from Health Consumers New South Wales, and we're so excited to just be attending this forum because of the amazing co-design work we're hearing about. The issue of reimbursement of consumers and service users is a really sort of hot topic at the moment. We've long advocated that consumers should be paid as part of being valued for their time and the experience that they bring, and that payment is actually one way to overcome some of the barriers, particularly for groups from low income, who we sort of often have difficulty connecting with. And payment is one way to overcome some of those barriers and help diversify the people we're talking to. There's no real consensus about whether payment should be by direct payment or vouchers. Both are used a lot. And I think it also depends on what your organisation is able to do. Big bureaucratic organisations tend to find vouchers difficult, and what the people you're working with want, because depending if people are receiving Centrelink payments, then cash payments can become quite, even modest cash payments, difficult and sort of problematic. We've got, I'll post a link to our website. We've got some suggested rates as well, just depending on the complexity of what's being asked. And so if you're actually asking people to sit on a panel, sort of, I can't remember the exact rate, but around $50 an hour is what we'd recommend. But if you're asking people to take leadership roles and chair, well, then we're suggesting more.
Thanks so much for that, Anthony. That's really helpful, and I'm sure the link will be helpful to a lot of people on the line. And there is a follow-up question in the chat, and I think this is, it's an important question because obviously working in the NGO sector, you know, the unfortunate reality for a lot of us is sometimes that we're just not in a financial position where we can remunerate our consumer and lived experience advisors in the way that we would like to. So the question in the chat is, how do you keep the league engaged without incentives? And how did you do that, Jo?
Yeah, I think it's just the passion that our clients have for the, you know, like they've gone through this experience with their child having cancer and they just want to make it better for the next people. So like they have that passion and they want to give back because they have been the recipients of our services as well. And so they've seen the benefits of that change. And I think it's just that drives people to, want to give back.
Yeah, and I think, would it also be accurate to say that it's also about being really clear about setting the expectations of what you're really looking for and being transparent about what you're, you know, the kind of commitment that you're looking for, so that people don't necessarily feel like they're being exploited or they've signed up for something that you know, turns into something bigger than what they'd envisioned.
Yeah, that's right, Elise, because at Redkite we have a really big thing that, you know, if we say we're going to do something, then we do it. And you know, we hold ourselves accountable to that. So we make it very clear what's going to happen. And then if it is going to change, you would have to make that change within the group and have that consensus. Yeah.
Thanks, Jo. Are there any other questions or comments from others on the line? I did have one boring logistical question, just because NCOS are kind of at the very start of a quite a similar process at the moment. I'm curious to know sort of how long was the time frame? How long did it take for you to kind of go from, you know, developing the terms of reference and the recruitment criteria and everything to kind of actually getting something up and running?
Yeah, I think it started in like January 2020, and then the first meeting was August. So there was quite a bit of lead time. And you've got to remember that everyone was shifting to the online environment and working from home. And so there were a lot of extra barriers as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Any other questions or comments before we head over to our next presentation?
Yeah, Elise and Jo, I have just a really quick question, especially about building that rapport on the online environment. Obviously, you didn't have the chance to do that face-to-face. I guess, what was your experience trying to build that rapport? Sorry, my camera was off. Online, and you know, did you have any challenges with that? And what advice would you give, I guess, anyone else trying to do that in, you know, such a, I guess, like sensitive space, especially with the consumers that you are engaging with?
I might throw to Nicole because she was actually in the meeting, so she can tell you what they did.
Yeah, it was a really incredible time because I think we were all adjusting to working on Zoom at that time. In the one-on-one interviews that I did with each participant, it was very much what time frame suits you both in terms of joining us. Is that what you were getting at, Andrew? How did we get everyone on together at the same time and keep a lively environment going?
Yeah, just making sure that everyone was sort of engaged at the same time.
Yeah, so we did.
With,
we did try to ensure that everyone had input into their preferred time frames. So we were very fortunate that those that were working were happy to give us an hour to 2 hours of their work time. Most people either were working part-time and just came in on their days off or weren't working. So we very much made sure that it was at a mutually convenient time. We just didn't dictate to them what time it was going to be. We certainly worked very hard. And the staff involved were both part-timers, so we were trying to work out which days would suit. And I think there was a flexibility in that we would change our work days if it meant that if everyone in the group could meet on a Friday afternoon, then we would change our work days to make sure that happened. So in some ways it was easier. I think, as Jo alluded to before, just as time went on, other commitments popped up. You know, it was something that we were very mindful of. People's work changed. There were people that said, look, if I'm available and free, I'm happy to join you, but I do have a role in my work that means I might have to travel sometimes. And therefore, so we also made sure that we had everyone's consent to record the sessions, and we would then send them a link afterwards if they were unable to make it, just to make sure that they could view the discussion.
Thanks so much, Nicole and Joe, for that presentation on such a fantastic initiative. It's been really, really heartening to hear about your experience, and I'm sure we'll probably be picking your brain even more so as we go through our own process. So thanks again, Joe. Really appreciate it. So our next presentation for today is from Alan Russell and Gail Carroll from Meals on Wheels. They are going to be giving a presentation on the Collaborative Emergency Toolkit. So over to you, Alan and Gail. You're just on mute, Gail.
Can I just share the screen, please?
Absolutely.
There we go. Okay. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we all work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters. Thank you. So, a collaborative toolkit for emergency services and home support providers, or the ACT, involves the development of a toolkit to assist home support providers to empower older people to make decisions about preparing for emergencies. It builds on older people's knowledge of local risks, providing information and linking to appropriate supports when required. It also builds the capacity of home support providers to train their staff and volunteers on how to discuss emergency preparedness with clients and to make referrals to emergency services for assistance. This partnership leverages on the strength of member organisations and emergency services. The approach also goes beyond just consultation. It builds and develops equal collaboration between the stakeholders to resolve the issue of the high proportion of vulnerable people, especially those over 65 years of age, dying due to household fires and other hazards. We use the principles of co-design, intentionally involving target users in designing solutions, postponing design decisions until after gathering feedback, integrating feedback from target users into insights, and developing solutions based on feedback. Even after we launched the ACT, we focused on feedback and any design improvements. The key to co-design is continual communication, collaboration, and commitment. With this in mind, I would now like to introduce you to Alan Russell, Manager of Eurobodalla Meals on Wheels, who was part of the pilot project, to give you a further insight into the ACT project. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail, and good morning, everyone. As Gail said, I'm the manager of Eurobodalla Meals on Wheels, and you probably don't know where Eurobodalla is. So let me tell you, we're on the far south coast of New South Wales, the three major towns that you may have heard of, Batemans Bay, Moruya and Narooma. And the Eurobodalla Shire is a very long ribbon area and has a large welfare population. And the welfare, it goes out to the pensioners who live here, and we have a large pensioner population. So we were an ideal opportunity for the trial of this. As was said, I'm the manager here at Eurobodalla Meals on Wheels, and I'm a director of Meals on Wheels in Queanbeyan. And my background is a principal of 3 independent schools before joining Meals on Wheels. And I've been involved in a lot of bits and pieces of developing projects and so on, and the word co-design was never mentioned way back there. And I just referred to Joanne's comments in the program that the most important thing I will say about co-design is it's a term with increasing frequency, and yes, it's often mistaken for consultation. So my background was a lot of consultation with people and not so much this new mechanism of co-design. I did say that I wasn't going to present any slides, and I'm not, because I want to make this a bit of a fireside chat to lead into discussion at the end, rather than putting up some more bits and pieces. But I would like to just say that I found Carla and Joe's presentations really good, and the co-design journey that Carla's slide indicated was very much one that we went through. So to me, as I speak, I'm going to use the letters of co-design and give you 8 words, and which will come up during my comments. Coordinators is the first one. Observations, diversity, evolve, support, information, groups, and needs. So you'll see my teaching background coming back and using all the bits and pieces out of the word co-design. So we were dealing with different people. We were dealing with the older people, and we found that these people were nervous about us coming to speak to them. They often had hearing issues, which made it interesting from implementing this on the ground and getting them to understand. They had sight issues. They were lonely. So they really needed to have family members, another group, and they didn't like bureaucracy. So they didn't like people coming in to talk to them with more pieces of paper. So we had to design something that was actually going to get through to them. So there were 6 pilot groups, and they were in various parts from the north of the state, out west, and in cities and so on. We were the southernmost group, and we were probably the one that had the biggest welfare component to it. So these are my observations from a regional perspective as to how this project developed and how we developed with it. First of all, the manager and the board had to agree that the project was worth trialling in their area. If I didn't, I agreed with it, but if my board wasn't happy for us to set the time aside, then it wasn't going to happen. The team, as in the wider team of the 6 representatives, plus the people from Meals on Wheels New South Wales, the team of managers or their project coordinators were given a draft information of what we were looking at and had to come to terms with the startup design and give initial feedback. The observations and the feedback were the cornerstone to the whole process, and the observations had to be honest. And where possible, alternative ideas were given, and the pleasing thing is that these were valued and discussed. And I was pleased to see some of mine end up in the project or stimulating further debate. So that made me feel good. The diverse background of the people involved. So the 6 areas from us down here out to Dubbo, to inner city Sydney, to Tweed Heads, was important for getting different points of view and experiences. And as I noted, our area had a huge welfare population. Each coordinator had to bring together a team of volunteers, so another group of people who would be able to deliver the message. So it wasn't useful just to gather a group of people. They had to be people who could actually talk and relate to others. So that was really, really important. I started off initially with 18 people and ended up with 6 fully committed to the project. Over time, these teams, ours and the other 5, and my teams within my organisation evolved. Some people left and others joined. But the one thing, or the 2 things they had to have was time and willingness. So they had to have time and willingness to visit our clients. And our initial project said that they were going to have to visit the clients several times over a 6-week period. Now this caused a little bit of an issue, and our people came up with some different ways of doing this, and these were listened to and developed. So we had to go and visit the clients and check that they understood. Now, remember, these are older people. These are 85-year-old people, and you're trying to tell them about tsunamis, we're on the coast, or you're trying to tell them about bushfires, or you're trying to tell them about floods and heavy rain. So you have to be able to speak to them and not confuse them and not alarm them. So these people had to be able to go back and check that these people were still safe, that they were still understanding the message, and that we were supporting them. So the volunteers also had to meet with family members from time to time. So a great deal of liaison was necessary. The volunteers had to be trained And we did that here in the office, but we also had a roadshow where our coordinator came down and spoke to everyone. So there was feedback coming from that training of what would probably work and what wouldn't, but with an open mind, our volunteers went out. The development of each team was over to the manager or the coordinator, and we were feeding back all the time what was actually happening. So the feedback was important. The clients, as I mentioned, needed to pick up on the need for this particular program and what we were looking at and what their needs were and what support they had and how receptive they were was really, really important. So the city clients were different to the rural and regional ones. So again, diversity was important. So we often heard of the Sydney people having so more people receptive to the ideas that were being put forward. We were having some trouble in getting volunteers. Feedback was really, really important, and there were deadlines that were set. And no matter how small the data, we were only a small organisation compared to Sydney, that was seen as important and valued. We did need a pushy leader. So we needed a coordinator out of Sydney who was going to get the 6 coordinators in the regions doing things and to keep in touch with them, and needed to be emailing and making phone calls and giving encouragement. So from on the ground perspective of implementing this, it was important. And that leader needed to be able to take feedback and not be closed. Motivating the team was important, and they had to understand what the project was about. So a necessary need-based project is what we needed and what we got. And there was a real need for this project, and that has actually been seen. So really, I don't want to keep going on, but I'll go back and just summarize again. The coordinators that we had to enthusiastically lead the project and to remain in touch. The observations that were ongoing had to be honest, the feedback had to be regular, and the data had to be given no matter how small. The diversity of the stakeholders, of the various teams, of the areas was important. And I do remind people, if you're trying to introduce something, and I'm sure that Carla and Joe's work did go out to the regions as well. The regions and the rural settings are important in how things come together. We're not all in the city. The evolution of it, the design from the first meeting to what we ended up with, which was a full kit, was important. The feedback on the graphics, the feedback on the language. And one of the important things that came through was the original presentation was too wordy. The older people were not going to be able to understand all of the paperwork or all of the things that were being said to them. Support. So I had to make sure that the coordinator was getting support, but difficult because I was the coordinator. And I would suggest that the manager, from my perspective, when we were implementing this, should not have been the coordinator. I should have appointed somebody else to actually be implementing it because I didn't have the time. The board and had to make sure they were giving the support. The information that was going to be taught and shared had to be carefully crafted. And as I mentioned before, ours was too wordy at the beginning. And the graphics that were introduced had to be appealing and catchy. They also had to be large enough that if we were using a screen, the older people could actually see them. Remember, their eyesight and their hearing is not good. Groups, lots of different groups, lots of individuals were part of the design process and then part of the implementation. So we had to make sure they were all on board. And then the project needed to have a real need. And it turned out that ours did, because we had something called a drought. Then we had bushfires. Then we had some floods. Then we had a pandemic. And then we had some floods. And then we had some more floods. So the work that we had put in actually had a purpose. So it was a valuable experience from on the ground, and those were my observations of being involved in designing this project. So that's really all I need to contribute at this stage.
Thank you so much, Alan and Gail, for that presentation. It's so interesting to hear about quite a different project and approach to doing things, and obviously hearing about something that has such a practical application as well in terms of emergency preparedness has been really interesting to hear about. Are there any comments or questions from others on the line for Alan about the collaborative toolkit?
I had one, Elise. It's Neha. I think, as you mentioned, Alan, you obviously, got all the different types of emergencies come your way over the past since you developed this. So I was wondering whether there was a feedback loop or responses to how the preparedness toolkit went, and have you been able to incorporate that after every emergency, I guess, that you've hit?
The toolkits come back and it's really, really good. We designed all of this before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then the pandemic hit. So for us as our little organisation, it's been really, really difficult to implement it. And I'd have to say we haven't, because I can't send volunteers into people's homes. It's difficult enough delivering our meals to people. We can't take them in the homes, put them in the freezers and all of those sorts of things. So we can't go into the homes to actually deliver this project at the moment. But we have the project, we have the people trained, and as things start to ease, we would be able to do it. But I am pleased to say that the people we did train and those who did the training have thought that the whole process was sensible, reliable and worthwhile.
And just to add to that, I just would like to let you know that we've just received funding for another 4 years for this project to ensure its sustainability in the future.
That's fantastic to hear, Gail. Not a common occurrence in our sector, I think. So well done on securing that funding. That's fantastic. And I guess following on from Neha's question, obviously the kind of practicalities of being able to implement a toolkit like this has been difficult during the pandemic, as has been for a lot of different services and supports that organisations provide. I guess I'm curious to know, in the context of the development of this toolkit, which was really in the face of, as you said, Alan, drought and then bushfires and floods and that kind of thing. When those things were happening, did that actually kind of disrupt the process of continuing to refine and develop the toolkit and get that feedback from older people on the ground? Were there times when you had to sort of put the project on hold while things were happening, or how did you sort of navigate that process while disasters were actually, happening?
Well, luckily for us, as we're developing the project, the only thing that was happening was the drought. So we were actually able to go around. So the people out west were still able to do things and to go and visit people and those sorts of things. So most of the work was done before the bushfires, before the floods, before the mouse plague out west, and all of that sort of thing happened. So we were lucky to be able to get it all done. But once we received it, then going to do further training became impossible. In this region, we were very, very hard hit by the bushfires. It came within 2 meters of my home. We had clients, we had volunteers who lost their houses. So to get people to go out and to actually talk about those sorts of situations when people had just been through it was really difficult, and we couldn't, and to be honest, and we really had to be aware that people didn't want at that stage to be talking about the disaster. So again, getting back into doing things has been difficult, and it's going to take a lot of time because they still don't want to talk about the fires. They still don't want to talk about the floods that we've had as well. So yeah. Timing is important.
That's absolutely right, Alan. And I think it sort of brings up a really important point that, you know, through all this work that we do with co-design and collaboration with the people that we work with, you know, you constantly have to be really, really aware and cognizant of what's happening for people on the ground, where they're at. You know, there may be times when they're just not in a position to be able to contribute or, you know, as you say, talk about things that have been quite traumatic for them. And we, you know, we need to be, as service providers, we need to be really, really responsive to that and kind of, you know, shift and change the ways that we're engaging with people as a result.
One thing I will say, Elise, is that the and Gail will back this up, is that the kit that is actually designed has proved to be timeless and has proved to go across all of these disasters. So yeah, we can refine it a little bit more, but it's really ready to go. So that comes from a lot of hard work, and you know, those 8 words were quite important to us.
Also, the toolkit, even though it was designed for the older population, it can be used across the board. And it's very interesting because it actually gets you to think about what disasters, how would you react and be prepared. So it is on our website if anyone would like to have a look at it.
That's great, Gail. But perhaps you could pop the link in the chat as well. That would be really helpful. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from others on the line?
Yeah, Eric Poulos here. My question, I suppose, there's 2 questions. One, as you mentioned, it is traumatic what people have been through in the bush in particular. And I'm just wondering if how much was trauma informed about the toolkit. And then the second one is tapping into the call and the Aboriginal community. How was it targeted to those groups?
I'm sorry, Eric, to have to ask you to repeat the questions because somehow you became a little, there's a lot of static and I didn't hear them.
Yeah, no worries. So briefly, it's trauma has been mentioned in terms of all those natural disasters that have happened. And so what was the overlay of being trauma informed within the kit? And then the other one was reaching the called and the Aboriginal community.
I got the first part of the question, the trauma. When my people went to visit the clients initially to talk about it, the clients became very nervous, very anxious about the fact that there could be floods, that there could be bushfires and so on. So we really had to have people who were sensitive, and so we had to make sure in our training before they went that they were going to be able to give positive messages, not dwell on the negative all of the time. So that was part of our training of my team anyway, and the selection of the people that we used. All our people were volunteers and giving up time. None of them asked for a dime for travel or anything, but we had to make sure that they were well trained and they were sensitive to the nervousness that these old people, often living on their own, and many didn't know their neighbours, so they didn't know where they were going to get support. So we really had to think how we were going to address some of those questions and how we were going to prepare them, how we were going to evacuate them. You know, if they were having floods, if their downpipes and all of that were causing a problem, what was going to happen? How were they going to get out? So we had to do some research of their neighbourhood and try and help them become aware of, you know, the services that were next door.
Thanks, Alan. And I think the second part of Eric's question, I think I managed to catch it, was that was there engagement with older people from Aboriginal and culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds during the project?
Yes, but not to the degree that we wanted. We've got a very large Aboriginal population down here, and you know, we're involved with the elders at Wallaga Lake, but it was very difficult to get into some of those homes and to get to people. We don't have a lot of clients who come from Aboriginal backgrounds. So trying to find people to connect with was really, really difficult. Linguistically, again, we don't have a huge, well, we've got a large number of people from different nationalities, but not who are connected to us. And trying to go and find them was difficult. I think they in Sydney, and maybe Gail can speak more, but I think that they had a better opportunity with the various nationalities than we did. And I think they got some valuable feedback which went into the overall design.
And also, just so you know that, part of the toolkit is a train the trainer program, so that you can actually, we're trying to get this out across, it's not just for Meals on Wheels, it's across all the home support providers. So we're hoping that, people will actually become part of this project across the board.
Thanks so much, Alan and Gail, for your presentation on that toolkit and for responding to a number of questions that have come through. It's been very helpful and we appreciate your time today. So we're almost at the end of today's session. So I'll hand over to Kate Masola from the University of Sydney now, who will take us through the poll process. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Elise. Thanks, everyone. They're amazing presentations. We just wanted to ask everyone if some feedback from today's session, and also about the future of the two forums, not the next one, which is another co-design theme, but the last two for the year. Can everyone see that poll that's come up? I hope so. Yep. If you could just put in some answers, that would be really helpful for us. So your experience of the forum, and if you're satisfied about the amount of time allocated. And I can't see any real-time results yet. I don't know if Rosalita can. So we're just talking about what also to do for the final two forums this year. And we have a link on SurveyMonkey where we're accepting expressions of interest for the themes. I'll just put it in the chat. At any time, anyone can submit into this expression of interest and with their ideas of what they'd like to present.
What I'm seeing in the poll right now, Kate.
Thanks, Rosalita. I can't see anything.
That you can't see it for some reason,
yeah.
But satisfactory all around. Thank you so much for that feedback. There's one reply around wanting to do breakouts as well, discussion in smaller groups. But overall, I think people are satisfied with the balance of the time allocations between presentations and discussions. The interesting bits about the topic for the next two forums so far, we have in the lead, this is like a racing or something event, impact of COVID and our crisis response and workforce retention and recruitment. Improving outcomes for service users is catching up. So we will publish the results of this poll, and obviously we will plan accordingly for the forums in August and October. But yeah, it's still running. So far, improving outcomes for service users, definitely an important theme for people, and then impact of COVID crisis.
Thanks, Rosalita.
So it's still going, so keep them coming. We've got 13 responses as of now.
Yeah, so just keep those poll answers coming, everyone. We are 1 minute left to go, so really appreciate your time. Just a reminder to everyone that we do have our next forum event on the 23rd of June at 10 a.m. again, and it'll be a part 2 to this theme. So we'll have another 3 fantastic presentations on co-design. It'll be great. And we'll also just be keeping this Zoom open for a few more minutes, just in case if there's any sort of contact details sharing that people want to be doing directly with each other. We'll give you a few minutes to do that before we close today's Zoom meeting. But just before everyone else goes, I just want to again thank all the presenters for their presentations today. It's been a really fantastic first NGO Researchers Forum for 2022. and we're really looking forward to the next one. So thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, so I'm seeing Bernadette still in the room, SBSA meetings.
And do we stop the recording now, Rosalita?
Oh, okay, good. Thank you so much.
Yes.
All right. Neha, are you seeing the, okay, stop the recording.